Welcome back to Bailiwick of Guernsey Shipwrecks. In this series you're going to be looking at all the shipwrecks related to the colliers. These were coal carriers. As Guernsey was a small island with no resource of its own, it had to ship in all its raw materials, including coal. This was used for heating houses and also the growing industry. A good portion of the empty returning coal boats to the UK would carry blue granite or diorite. This was part of Guernsey's quarrying trade, and it was very big, with 200 quarries being active at the time in the 1800s. It was usually shipped from St Sampson's Harbour back to England. Almost 500,000 tonnes per year was being quarried by the early 1900s. The first shipwreck in this series we're going to look at is the International. Between 1 and 2 o'clock this morning, the brigantine, International, loaded with anthracite coal for the West Counties coal, stranded on the Ferrier's Rock after having struck on the Musée. It is evident serious damage has been done to the vessel, for the water commenced to pour in at an alarming rate, and the pilot and crew took to the ship's boat. They were able to reach St Peterport Harbour without difficulty, and the master and crew have been put up at Mr Tom's boarding house, Normandy House salary. She certainly wasn't the first shipwreck in the Channel Islands to go down with coal on board. But with every shipwreck, you learn from each disaster. Built in 1862, she is by no means a young boat. Originally engaged in the West Indies trade, but was lately engaged in the coasting trade and was a frequent visitor to Guernsey. The last trip to this island, however, was made almost 12 months previous. Given her age, she changed ownerships a few times over the years, with her last owner being William Goldfinch of Whitstable, Kent. Loading with 330 tonnes of coal at Briton Ferry and sailed on the 20th of December 1907 for Guernsey. The brigantine left Swansea, and it was stated that had the International had left a day earlier, she would have had a favourable wind at the outset and would probably have reached Guernsey some time ago. As it was, the brigantine was delayed by unfavourable winds and had occurred over a month, 34 days on the journey. Even once arriving in the Guernsey roads, she still wasn't safe and still had to be navigated into St Peterport Harbour for unloading.
So the story of the International was it was coming up southbound, so it's coming up here and it was running up to St Peterport Harbour, and there's the castle light, that white bit on the end, and it took on a pilot called James Frederick Masterton, and basically he was tasked with taking the boat into harbour, because between this point here, which is St Martin's Point, and that little tiny speck over there, which used to be a well, it still is a cardinal marker, but it used to be a buoy called the Lower Heads. Between that you need a pilot to bring you up into this stretch of water, which is the Little Russell, and from here to these set of rocks down here is roughly 2 miles. So we had loads of room. But what happens with the tide is the tide sets in and it goes northeasterly, then it turns around and then comes southwesterly. So basically he's bringing the boat up from the south, and what he realised is the tide was taking him over all the time to the east, and before they knew it, they were to the Lower Head marker buoy, which is that little tiny black thing in the sun there. And as they noticed that they were in that position, he knew he was too far east, and we got a ridge of rocks that run all the way up here. What he decided to do was chuck an anchor down, knowing the tide was only going to push him further northeast. Not sure if that was the right idea or not, but as the tide turned, what happened is that the vessel turned around, and there's a pole right there called Musée. And what happened is it struck the Musée and damaged the rudder. Anyway, they slipped the anchor, thinking that, you know, it's all come to an end. And what it done is it slowly drifted northeast up to the Bar Bay, and the Ferriers, which is this one right here, not the big rock at the back, but the one down here, and that's got a pole on. So from there it basically sunk within minutes. There was enough time for them to get all their personal belongings, but the shipwreck was laying, as you see here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a journey up there, and we're going to try and see if we can find the coal.
This isn't the first time I've dived here looking for bits of this wreck. Last time I found a load of coal. This time I'm hoping to find some chunks of wood in the sand. I was told by the other divers on the boat that they had seen long lengths of wood, probably deck timbers or something like that. Very similar to like a railway sleeper buried in the soft white sand. Already I find traces of coal. This would have been huge chunks, now pulverised into little pieces. This coal was destined for Western Countries Association in the Shipwreck Mills. When looking for pieces of shipwreck, everything looks man-made, everything's flat or has right angles to it. Most of it is just stones. Yesterday afternoon, several boats visited the wreck of the Brigantine International, and from Guernsey watchers with glasses could see the men cutting away portions of their running gear. Today, 2 boatloads of ropes, lines, sails and blocks, etc. were landed from the Herm boat and pilot Legg's boat. The recovery of this property was reported to the authorities, and goods have been placed in stores on the Coal Quay. This morning it is seen that the wreck had entirely disappeared. This is not surprising, for the vessel is some 44 years old and heavily laden. The tide too in the neighbourhood of the Ferriers is very strong. It is also presumed that the ship broke amidship, the fore and aft part slipping from the rocks into deep water. With his usual enterprise, Mr. F.W. Guerin of High Street had issued a series of picture postcards of the wreck, showing the vessel in various positions. Every so often I'd find these small pieces of coal, but nothing large like last time. Plenty of chunks of coal to be found, but I feel now the tide's 45 minutes turned. Even the seaweed's trying to attack me. Here you can see laying next to the rock, one kill bolt. I now realise I'm probably well away from the reef now. I'll try one last trick. This is an old diver's trick. Find a small fish and follow it, and hopefully it takes you back to a shipwreck. I think this is the wrong type of fish. It needs to be a little pelt. As I return to the surface, I think about my research and about the court case. As with nearly every shipwreck, an attribution has got to be given to someone to blame. On the 30th of Jan, pilot James Frederick Masterton responded to a summons charging him with an infraction of Article 15 of the Ordinance relating to pilots by having during the night of January the 23rd, by his negligence or incompetence, caused the brigantine International to strike the rocks to the south of Jettu. Captain W.C. Jones, harbour master, said he was a member of the Pilotage Examination Board. Defendant was sworn as a pilot on December the 5th, 1907. Mr. Edwin Appleton Court, the master of the International, said the vessel was a brigantine. She was from Britain Ferry to Guernsey with coal. Witness was aged 49 and had been coming to Guernsey since he was a boy. Witness had held a master's certificate since 1878. About 11 a.m. on January 22nd, they came up from the Hanwha from the southwest. On the night, the vessel was making from 3 to 4 knots. The breeze was about south by south-southeast. The breeze was a commanding one. When the pilot boarded the vessel, Witness had the breakwater light on his starboard bow, still bearing about north-northeast. Pilot Masterton, on joining the vessel, took the helm and put the breakwater light on the port bow. They came off St. Martin's Point, and by the pilot's orders the mainsail was taken in and stowed. Some of the upper canvas was also stowed. This was not unusual, as they were nearing port, and the breeze was still commanding. They had put the boat in the water for the purpose of getting out a stern rope. When they reached harbour, Pilot Masterton questioned whether they could get the boat over, as they were going at a good rate. The boat, however, was got over and was towed astern. Witness then walked aft, and defendant remarked that they were getting in very nicely. At this time, Witness heard a rustle, and asked defendant if it was the tide or more wind. At the same moment, the mate pointed out a buoy on the port bow. This proved to be the lower-head buoy, and the defendant immediately ordered the anchor to be let go. As soon as possible, the port anchor was let go, the mate seeing the operation. Witness asked the defendant if he was going to round the vessel on the tide. This was just before the anchor was lowered. As the anchor was being let go, Witness took the helm, which had been left by the defendant, and put it hard a starboard. This would have the effect of bringing the vessel's head to St. Martin's Point. The anchor brought the vessel up, with her head towards St. Martin's Point. They had about 30 fathoms of cable to the hawser pipe. Going aft, Witness found the helm still hard a starboard, and he eased it. This vessel was then quite snug. By this time the lower-head buoy was out of sight. The night was clear and fine. It was about 8 to 8:30 when they anchored. The pilot said he had not anchored because there was any danger, but to prevent the vessel driving up the big Russell. They remained at anchor till about 10:30. Previous to this, the pilot waved the stern light for the tug. He had seen the tug going in towards the town harbour. The tug must have seen the light, as the course was altered and the tug made towards them. They got to the tow line ready, but the tug went to windward and took no notice. Defendant hailed the tug, but it was stated the tug did not hear. Masterton again waved the light, and a flare was burned, but the tug put into harbour. The vessel commenced to drag her anchor and drifted towards the northeast. Witnesses were able to ascertain this was observing 2 of the town lights. Witness informed the pilot, who said that according to his bearings the vessel was not driving. About 11:30 the pilot instructed that the anchor should be got up, and this was done. Witness was at the wheel and asked the pilot to go forward to take away the chain as it was hove in. About 5 fathoms had been taken in when, looking astern, Witness saw a beacon on a rock. Witness called the pilot aft and pointed the beacon out to him. The anchor had not yet been tripped. The pilot gave orders to vast heaving and proposed slipping anchor. Witness asked who was to pay for the anchor. He did not think there was room to clear even if they slipped, and he believed they were safer at anchor. Witness then proposed stowing canvas to let the ship lie quiet. The vessel was lying quiet at the time, and the anchor was holding. This continued till 12:30, when there was still a nice breeze. Witness was certain there had not been no variation in the force of the wind from 7 o'clock. At 12:30 the pilot ordered the anchor to be taken up. He had previously advised witnesses that the western tides would take the vessel clear of the rocks. Witness had suggested leaving the vessel till the western tide set strong, and defendant agreed. When the pilot gave the order, witness went forward and found the vessel was lying to the leeward of her anchor. From this he concluded that even with a commanding breeze they would not be able to clear. Witness advised waiting for the time, and the defendant agreed. At 12:45 the pilot again gave the order to heave up the anchor. Witness did not ascertain this time how the ship was lying. They proceeded to heave on the anchor, but did not get it clear of the ground. Both witness and the pilot were assisting in the operation when the vessel struck aft. The shock was not very violent, but quiet enough to knock a hole through her. The blow unshipped the rudder, as witness discovered on running aft and glancing down the rudder trunk. The 3 lower fastenings must have gone, and the rudder was only holding on by the fastenings near the deck. The pilot then ordered the anchor to be shipped, and this was done, the operation taking 2 or 3 minutes. At this time the vessel was pointing towards the Barbie Reef. No sail had been set, proving to the order to have the anchor. A man was up aloft, but when the vessel struck he came straight down. Later sail was set, first on the port braces and then on the starboard braces, but the vessel was unmanageable and went towards the inner edge of the Barbies. All the crew then got into the boat before the vessel actually struck. Witness did not know who gave the order to get into the boat. It was felt that the vessel was done for. The vessel had not been sounded after the first striking. There was no time. They did not know when the vessel would strike again and bring down the mast about their heads. Witness swore that the pilot was in the boat before him. The mate was the last to enter the boat. By Advocate Randall. When the pilot came on board, he altered the course, getting the breakwater light on the port bow. Witness was certain defendant did not later alter the course towards Fermain Bay. They were never within 1.5 miles of St. Martin's Point, and the witness told the defendant, so he came on board. The vessel was afterwards allowed to get too far to the eastward. They passed the lower head buoy on the eastern side. The anchor was then dropped 2 or 3 minutes after passing the buoy. The wind had not changed in the meanwhile, and the vessel was making the same speed. The attention of the pilot was called to the buoy, and he at once replied, "Let go of the anchor!" When signalled, the assistants passing within what witness considered to be hauling distance on the weather side. The vessel was then at anchor, heading towards St. Martin's Point, with the stern tailing towards the north-east. This position was maintained till about midnight, when the tide changed, and the vessel came round with her head to the south-east and her stern tailing towards Town Harbour. When witness noticed the beacon, it was nearly astern. The low end of jetty was open on the Guernsey side of the beacon. When the witness first noticed the beacon, it was on the starboard quarter. Witness refused to slip his anchor because he considered himself safer where he was. The anchor was never raised off the ground, for the vessel shoaled more rapidly than they could heave in, till she struck. She bumped 2 or 3 times. Witness could not say if it was struck on the keel or the bilge. There might be a different kind of bump, but witness had no previous experience. Witness called the attention of the pilot to the fact that the rudder was gone. Witness tried to work the rudder, but found that it was useless. Just before the crew got into the boat, defendant asked that the topsail should be set. None of the crew, however, would go aloft then. At this time the International struck. There was no one on board, but they boarded the vessel after she struck. Witness adhered to his statement that the pilot was in the boat before him. This concluded the master's evidence, and the court adjourned at 1:15 and resumed at 2:30. On the case being resumed, evidence was given by Mr. Charles Botton, the mate, and Captain Jones, harbour master. This concluded the evidence for the prosecution, and the further hearing was adjourned till next Thursday. This court appearance had concluded the evidence for the prosecution, and a further hearing was adjourned until today. Today's witnesses were called for the defence. Mr. John Gilman said he was a master of the assistants and also a pilot. He was in charge of the assistants when Pilot Masterton was placed on board the International. This was about 7:30 or 7:45, and the International was about 5 miles south of the breakwater light. The vessel will thus have been about 2 3/4 miles from St. Martin's Point, and the hanwha was just shot in. Witness was certain the hanwha was not open, but he could see the loom of the light over the land. The bailiff here pointed out that Mr. Court, master of the International, was not cross-examined on this point. The story now put forward was quite a new one. The hour given was different, and Mr. Court stated that the hanwha light was open. Continuing, Mr. Gilman said that after putting Pilot Masterton on board, they steamed off to the westward. They saw no more of the vessel till they returned. Then they saw a light in the Great Russell and made towards it, believing it to be the steamer's light. They found it to be the International, and she was well brought up, about 2.5 cables from the Lowerhead buoy. The assistant returned to harbour. In the opinion of the witness, the International was not then in a dangerous position. They saw no flare from the International, but a flare might have been burned. The wind did not vary during the evening. It was a breeze that would have set the vessel at 3 to 4 knots. When Pilot Masterton boarded the vessel, the tide would be running about 4 miles an hour east-north-east. By His Majesty's procurer, the International was brought up in the north-east of the Lowerhead buoy. The next 2 witnesses, called J. Longley and Millier, who was sworn last week, failed to respond to their names. Gaston Levallois, residing at the Bobigny, said he was a passenger on board the International. Witness heard the pilot give orders concerning the heaving of the anchor after the vessel had been anchored. These orders were carried out as quickly as possible. That was about 11:30. Only 5 fathoms of chain were hauled up, and a man was sent up to loosen the sails. At this moment the vessel struck and the sailor came down. The crew then were told to Witness to put on the best clothes, as they was going to be in danger. Witness did change his clothes as speedy as possible. By this time all the crew were getting into the boat, and Witness did the same. The first time they got into the boat, the captain was the last to leave the vessel. The pilot got into the boat just after the crew, and before the mate and master. When they got into the boat, the vessel had already struck twice, the first time not very hard, and the second time as the vessel remained fast. On entering the boat, they made towards harbour. The pilot ordered them to go back to the ship, but all hands refused. Then the pilot said that if they went back to the ship and obey his orders, the ship would come out. They did not go back, but rowed to the town harbour. Was the rudder unshipped? Advocate Randall stated that owing to evidence brought forward last Thursday for which he had not prepared, he would like to call witness as to the present state of the rudder of the International. H.M. Procureur said he regretted this incident, but as he wished the inquiry to be quite fair, he would not object to the new witnesses being called. Messieurs Daniel and Clifford de Carteret were then sworn. Mr. Daniel de Carteret, master of the Salvage steamer Pioneer, said he had visited the International every day since Saturday week, except on Tuesday. He had made a thorough examination and found that there was nothing wrong with the rudder. It was in good condition as ever. It was hanging by all gudgeons. The witness believed that there were to be 4. The keel was also sound. There was not a splinter on it. It was incorrect to say that the rudder was away from the stern post. By H.M. Procureur, the vessel on the port side laying squarely and uncovered at half tide. The deck was perpendicular, and they were able to enter the main hold in a boat. The side of the ship was so level that you could play football or anything else on it. Mr. Clifford de Carteret, also of the Pioneer, gave corroborative evidence. The rudder now was just as it should have been. The bailiff asked if the H.M. Procureur wished to obtain evidence as to the position of the rudder. This was of an important point. After consultation with Captain Jones, harbour master, H.M. Procureur said the state of the tide would not allow of the rudder being inspected. When the witness called for the defence saw the rudder, there were spring tides. The tides would not be suitable for examination, except by a diver, for about a fortnight. The learned speaker was sorry he did not know of this evidence being brought forward, or else he might have made arrangements. If this new evidence was true, it would appear that the evidence of the master and the mate was a lie. It was an important matter for the pilot. If the rudder were properly hung, it would discount the evidence of the 2 principal witnesses for the prosecution. The new witnesses may have been mistaken. The tides would be suitable for an examination in a fortnight, or earlier if a diver could be sent down. The bailiff agreed that this was a very material point. The rudder should be examined as soon as possible, today if it could be managed. The case was then adjourned indefinitely. The court rose at 12:45. Judgment reserved. Last Thursday, witnesses for the defence stated that the rudder of the ship was undamaged, and the case was adjourned in order that the rudder might be examined by a diver. Mr. Daniel Clancy, a new witness for the prosecution, was sworn. Mr. Clancy said he was a diver, and he had worked for the States. Yesterday he went out to the wreck of the International in the Vixen. Witness descended between 1 and 1:30, and the tide was then being low. He proceeded to examine the rudder and found that the two lower pintles were broken. The gudgeons, which were fixed to the stern post, were undamaged, but the pintles were broken in the gudgeons. A third pintle just under the stern was undamaged, but the rudder was 6 or 8 inches away from the stern post. Witness could not say if the third pintle or gudgeon would be sufficient to hold the rudder. He was unable to examine the keel owing to the growth of the seaweed. By Advocate Randall. There were 14 or 15 feet of water over the rudder when witness examined it. All the gudgeons were sound. The gudgeons were like eyes on the stern post, which would have pintles or pins on the rudder fitted. The pintles were perhaps 6 inches long. Witness should not think a blow under the rudder would break the pintles. It must have been a side blow, and witness was of the opinion that the pintles were broken when the vessel fell over on her port side. Witness examined the heel of the rudder. It appeared to him to be intact, but he could not speak certainly, as there was a growth of seaweed and slime. The lower part of the rudder was about 6 or 8 inches from the stern post. It was horizontally away from the stern post, but drooped slightly. It was in such a position that the vessel, if it were righted, the rudder would resume its proper position. The upper portion of the rudder was close up to the stern post. Witness noticed 3 gudgeons and pintles, the third being just below the rudder trunk. He could not say if it would be possible to work the rudder with a wheel. In the position of the vessel was lying, the rudder might sway in the tide. The tide ran very strongly at this point and might well close the rudder up to the stern post at times. Counsel: am I assuming it not strained? Witness was then asked: would this be sufficient, were you a master of the ship, to make you abandon her? Witness replied: certainly not. H.M. Procurer asked if it would be sufficient reason in view of the fact that the manoeuvres on the port and starboard braces had proved unsuccessful. Witness replied that according to the evidence of the ship was making water. This completed the evidence. The question whether or not the rudder was disabled was of great importance, and the court should weigh the evidence on the point very carefully. Either the damage to the rudder was done when the ship struck the Musée, before the vessel struck, or after the striking. The theory of the defence was that after the vessel first struck, the master and mate, with or without the knowledge of the crew, decided that this would be a good opportunity of losing the vessel. From this moment they would not help the pilot, and from that time the order of pilots were not carried out. The bailiff pointed out that this was a very serious allegation, but doubtless counsel understood his instructions. Continuing, counsel referred to the statement of the master and mate that 3 lower gudgeons of the rudder were carried away. Was it possible at night time, looking down the rudder trunk and through the water, to see if the gudgeons were broken away? As a matter of fact, only 2 gudgeons were affected. The third gudgeon, that nearest the rudder trunk, the only one that could have been seen from the deck, was now proved not to have been damaged. Defendant had informed the Speaker that he actually worked the tiller after the vessel struck. Counsel alleged that the crew did not do their duty by the ship. The master himself had admitted that he had and all the crew were in the boat when the vessel struck for the second time. This was to say the least unusual. Pilot James Masterton again appeared at the bar to respond to the summons charged him with having during the night of 22nd of January by his negligence or incompetence caused the brigantine International to strike the Musée and Barbet rocks to the south of Jettu. The evidence and addresses for the defence and prosecution were concluded last Thursday. The court then adjourned in order that they might have the opportunity to consider their decisions. Today the bailiff said the court had an opportunity to read both their own notes and the shorthand notes of the official reporter. One of the 2 questions had arisen with which it would be necessary to deal. Captain W.C. Jones, harbour master, was then asked:
granted that the International passed to the eastward of the Lowerhead buoys and anchored near the Musée, Was that a prudent, seaman-like course under the conditions? There was a commanding breeze and the vessel was making 3 to 4 knots. Was it then prudent, safe to anchor? I did not see any need for anchoring. Had defendant starboard his helm and braced up his yards, he might have cleared. Might he have made up the big Russell? He would have to go on the of attack. Would that have been a dangerous course in the circumstances? It would.
The bailiff then summed up at length with his usual ability. In his opening remarks, he learned speaker said that it must be borne in mind that they could not put defendant on oath. There was a possibility of a bias in such a case, though it might be an innocent bias, but the master and the crew against the pilot. They must therefore give the pilot the benefit of this. On the other hand, they must remember that a pilot has a responsible duties. Every ship coming here must take a pilot in a certain rota. Therefore, every pilot must be a certified, skillful and careful navigator, and must undertake that a vessel for which he is responsible should be navigated with due care and skill. Neglect in either of these particulars constituted the heads of charge against Pilot Masterton. Here, the learned speaker quoted from the ordinance under which the present charge was brought forward, showing that the defendant, if found guilty, might be mulcted in damages not exceeding £50 and might have his licence suspended or withdrawn. But it must be proved that he, with culpable or neglect or incompetence, was therefore want of ordinary care or ordinary skill, such as we commiserate with the duties undertaken by a pilot. The question the courts would need to have to answer were as follows.
1. Was there on the part of Masterton want of care or want of skill in taking the course he did, which brought him to the Lowerheads buoy? 2. Was there want of care or skill in casting anchor when it was found that the vessel had passed the buoy? 3. Was there want of care or skill in heaving anchor before the western tide set in strong enough to float the vessel from the rocks? 4. Was there want of care or skill in any subsequent time?
Having stated these points to the court, the bailiff then gave a masterly resume of the whole of the evidence, showing the bearing of the evidence on the question he had stated. With regards to the original course, the bailiff said it was clear that the pilot never expected to get where he did. No one was more astonished than he to find the vessel to the eastward of the Tête d'Aval, the Lowerheads. After looking at all this research and all the court cases, I realised he had lost his licence or his ability to earn money forever. This wasn't normal. Normally you'd lose it for about 6 months. With all shipwrecks, time is really important, especially when it comes to salvage. Here you can see John Martell's Pioneer. It was a steam launch, and she was used to salvage all the stuff from the International. She'd been laying in the Creening Hard for months beforehand. Mr. Martell was no stranger when it came to salvaging from shipwrecks. He had already acquired the rights to salvage from the Ocean Queen in 1906, in the Forth 1907, and now he had acquired the International in 1908. He went on to be a very successful salvage expert and bought many more wrecks.
Hello, I'm one of the divers for the Pioneer. My name is Thomas Le Cheminot Simo. I'm from Alderney. This is my son on the left, and just standing behind him is my friend John Buckle.
A large quantity of coal has been recovered from the wreck of the International by the salvage steamer Pioneer and landed at the Albert Pier. The coal was recovered by divers to whom baskets heavily weighted with chains were sent down from the salvage boat. A large quantity of coal has been salved from the wreck of the International at the Ferriers. Anchors and cables have also been salved. Mr. T. Simon, the ordinary diver employed in the salvage operation, reports that
The wreck is fast breaking up. The deck is giving way. So we've been out to the wreck and had a little look. On the 25th of Jan, just a couple of days later, it couldn't be seen from town anymore, and everyone had thought it had sunk in deep water. All the fishermen visited the Ferriers yesterday, and anyway, they found out it hadn't sunk. It just turned over onto its side, the mast laying horizontal along the surface. It's possible to actually walk along the side of the vessel. And it's also been said that large quantities of rope, etc. were removed from the wreck, which were visited by all the small craft from Guernsey and also Sark.
Dad, tell them what we found when we were diving on the 12th of March.
Wow, you won't believe it. I found a loaded revolver with 6 in the chamber. Yesterday we worked a long day on the 12th. We started at 5 AM and we returned at 2 PM to St. Peter Port, the Pioneer being heavily laden on the deck and the bulwarks, and we had a large windlass slung to her bells. Quite a large crowd witnessed the arrival of the Pioneer. As they were landing the wreckage, very large ormers could be seen among it all. We had an okay day on the 16th of March. We brought in a portion of one of the masts. We also brought in a lot of deck beams, and yeah, they were heavy. That was in the afternoon. They told us this morning that the 4 crew members, James Thompson, William Britton, Gustav Bartrait and William Jewell, have proceeded back to Weymouth by the Ibex. But I think the master, Mr. Court, and also his mate, Mr. Charles Button's going to stay here and watch the interest for the owners.
Right then, I suppose we better say goodbye because we're doing our salvage, but we're not going to leave much left. Good luck finding it in the future.
it was stated in the newspapers of the time that Mr. Martel's friends, who admire his enterprise, hope that he will succeed in bringing back a great portion of the International's gear and part of her cargo. Looking on the seabed today, did he do a really good job, or has it simply been a matter of the tide washing it away? Don't worry, I'll try and find some another time.